Would you stand, please? I believe in no one name called Jesus. I believe Jesus on Galilee. I believe that He walked on the water. And I believe that He's the answer for me. Yes, I believe in the one name called Jesus. I believe He died on Mount Calvary. And I believe that the tomb was found empty. And I believe that He's the answer for me. I believe in the words of the Bible. How He made the poor blind man to see. I believe that the deaf ears were opened. And I believe He's made a difference in me. Yes, I believe in the one name called Jesus. I believe He died on Mount Calvary. And I believe that the tomb was found empty. And I believe that He's the answer for me. I believe that He spoke to dead and He said, "Come and lie and set free." I believe that He reigns up in heaven. And I believe that He is coming again. Yes, I believe in the one name called Jesus. I believe He died on Mount Calvary. And I believe that the tomb was found empty. And I believe that He's the answer for me.
Good morning. Are we on? Good. I'm glad you're all here. If you'd like to, go ahead and turn to 1 Samuel 17. We'll be there in a few minutes. Said this the last time I was up here, and I'll continue to say it again. I have a lot of respect for the men that's stood up here and have done this time and time again, week after week, Sunday morning, Sunday night. High tenor. Thank you. It's a lot of pressure. especially when a man stands up here the week before you and talks about prayer. Well, since Thursday when I got the phone call from Keith, I've been doing a lot of praying. And so I'm hoping it'll work out. We're very happy, and we celebrate with the McNutts and their arrival of their new baby, baby Reed. We're very excited for them. They've had a whole lot of changes since March. We have a world pandemic. They've moved from Kentucky. They've got a new house, and now they have a new baby. I don't know what else comes next, but anyway, a lot of exciting times for them. So we are excited for them. I guess to start this morning, when I was asked to do this, I really didn't know what direction to take. And so I'm going to use something I used a couple of months ago with the youth group. In 2004, the American League Championship, the Boston Red Sox were playing the New York Yankees. They were down 3-0, and they had 3 outs left before their season was over. The problem is they're facing the Yankees. And the second problem is they're facing Mariano Rivera, who is postseason's greatest relief pitcher. Mariano Rivera comes up, and he walks the first man. That's a big no-no. Getting the leadoff man on is a big deal. Boston's down by 1 run in the bottom of the 9th. Again, down 3-0 in a best-of-7 series. Kevin Millar walks, and in comes a trade from the Los Angeles Dodgers. They made the trade mid-season. This man had a really good season, but the way things work in baseball, it is a business. They made a trade mid-season. Everybody knew that man was going to steal the base. Everybody in the park, the commentators knew it, and you can assure that the New York Yankees knew that man was going to steal that base. Rivera, the pitcher, tries a pickoff 3 times. He slides in safe. The 4th time, Rivera goes to the plate. Dave Roberts steals the bag just split seconds before Derek Jeter applies a tag. The man at the plate hits a single, and Dave Roberts scores. Now, what's interesting about that and the backstory behind Dave Roberts is the fact that in spring training, he was told by the base coach, he said, one of these days, you're going to steal a base that means something. One of these days, you're going to steal a base that means something. I don't know how much of you keep up with baseball, but from that point on, Boston went on to win 8 straight baseball games. They ended up beating the Yankees in 7 games to win the American League, and then they beat St. Louis in 4 games to win the World Series. It's the first time it's been done in hundreds of years. And then, of course, Boston's kind of shook that off, and they've done really well since then. But all because of that one stolen base, they go on to win a World Series. So, what's my point in all this? You hear things like, don't sweat the small stuff, okay? But sometimes it's the small stuff that makes a big difference. And so we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about the simple things, the small things that have happened that we read about in the Bible that have done wonders for God's kingdom and to glorify Him. So the first one I want to talk about is Joseph. And the reason I want to talk about Joseph is because Joseph was the second youngest son of Israel. But he was chosen. That spot right there is very squeaky. I'm going to try to stay away from that. Joseph's the second youngest of 12 children. But he was the one that was chosen by God. Because of his dreaming, his brothers hated him. They sold him to slavery. And he was despised by his brothers because of his dreams and also because his father loved him so much. He gets sold to slavery, but what happens? Well, everything that he has and everything that he is in charge of in Potiphar's house. In Genesis 39 and verse 5 it says, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned in the house and in the field. Because everything that Joseph touched was because he had faith and believed, and the Lord was with him. That's what it says about Joseph. The second one, we talk about Moses. And Moses started off in a basket. His mother put him in a basket because she didn't want him to die and just hoping that somebody would save him. He grows up in Pharaoh's house. He ends up leading the entire Israelite nation out of Egypt after being pushed out by his own countrymen. And here's the thing about Moses. He wasn't a very good speaker. And he knew that. He was very humble about the things that he had. And the one that I want to spend a little time on this morning is David. And that's where we get to 1 Samuel 17 and verse 4. What's interesting about David is the youngest of Jesse's sons. David wasn't even invited to be selected by Samuel. He was out tending the flock. He's out tending the sheep. And Samuel comes up and he says, Jesse, I'm going to choose a son that's going to be the next king. He's going to replace Saul. And one by one, he marches his sons in front of him. And they all get passed over. And Samuel says, are you sure you don't have another son? He said, yes, but he's the youngest one. He's real young. He's out there tending the flock. Where is he? Where is he? And sure enough, David shows up. And the Lord was with David. And we know all the things that David did, but I do want to spend a little bit of time in talking about David and Goliath. You know, Goliath's a big man. Like 9.5 feet tall, all this kind of stuff. In 1 Samuel 17, verse 4, it says, then the champion came out from the armies of the Philistines, and he named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was clothed with scale armor, which weighed about 5,000 shekels of bronze. He also had bronze greaves on his legs and a bronze javelin slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the head of the spear weighed 600 shekels of iron. His shield carrier also walked before him. And we all know the story. That David goes out. He finds his brothers. His dad just wants to know how his brothers or his sons are doing. And David goes out to find out. And he hears this Goliath man just taunting them. And he tells them, he says, the Lord's on our side. We can take this man. And his brothers are giving him a hard time, saying, no, it's not going to happen. You're not going to do this. And he goes before Saul and he says, Saul, I can take this man because the Lord is with us. We will prevail. We all know that David goes in front of Goliath. First of all, he gets dressed. He can't even hold up the armor. He has to take it all off. He goes and finds his 5 stones in the brook. And he goes and approaches Goliath. Goliath says, what am I, a dog that you send this young fellow with sticks to come fight me? And David, and he also says that I'm going to slaughter everyone and I'm going to feed you to the birds. And David said, no, you got it wrong. The Lord's on our side, and it's going to be the opposite. You're going to be fed to the birds. So they go and meet at the battle line. David slings a stone, 1 stone, and it sinks into his forehead. And of course, we all think about the story of David and Goliath, and a big man and a little boy, and he's very successful. And we get that. But what I want you to focus on is a little bit more. There's a little bit more of the story that maybe you don't see, that we don't really understand or think about. If you go back to Genesis 3, when Eve decides that she's going to partake of the forbidden fruit, she says, the serpent made me do it. Well, in Genesis 3 and 15, God curses the serpent. And he says this, he says, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise or crush you on the head, and you shall strike him on the heel. So when we read the story of David and Goliath, we think of victory. But what does the number 6 represent? 6 cubits tall. Spear weighed 600 shekels. That's Satan. See, to a Jewish boy, when they read this story and they hear this story, they see Satan because he is struck in the head. It's a promise that God makes that he's going to do. This is one of the first fulfillments too when it comes to Jesus as well. It's a little bit deeper than that. But David glorifies God through a stone and a sling. 1 Samuel 17, 46 and 47, it says, "And I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts to the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." So through a sling and a stone, David glorifies God. So let's go to the New Testament. What are some examples of something very small, maybe something we feel like that's insignificant, that glorifies God? Turn to Luke 21, verse 1. And to give us a little bit of context, in chapter 20, Jesus is having a lot of discussions. He's spending a lot of time looking at the scribes and the Pharisees. He's talking about taxes. They're trying to kind of pigeonhole him and say, well, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Jesus says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Give to the Lord what the Lord is. And the Sadducees come and ask him about the resurrection. They have some long, drawn-out plan of this man dies, and his brother marries a wife, and then that one, and on and on and on, and asking all these questions. And he keeps answering these questions. He said, God is the God of the living, not the God of the dead. And the more he keeps asking these questions, finally Jesus just says, we can't be like these people. He says, not to be like the scribes who walk with long robes, love greetings and chief seats in the synagogues, honor at banquets, and devour widows' houses. It says, and offer long prayers. So that's in chapter 20. And then you move right into chapter 21 in Luke 21. And it says, and he looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the treasury. So he's just kind of told these disciples, after going through this situation and telling them we can't be like this. And then he looks up, and the first thing he sees is the rich putting money in to the offering plate. Doesn't have a problem with that. But what's behind them? And he saw a poor widow putting in 2 small copper coins. Verse 3 says, he said, truly I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all of them. For they out of their surplus put in the offering, but she out of her poverty put in all that she had to live on. We all have struggles. Some of us may struggle financially. And $1 may be all that you have. But it doesn't matter. God still appreciates that. We can still use that. And the best example I can give is the work that's done in Haiti. And we buy jars of peanut butter that last a long time. See, for us, $1 may not mean a whole lot. I know in Mexico, $1 is 1/5 of a day's wages. Child care for a day. And I'm not saying that to pressure you into giving more. That's not what the elders have asked me to do. Understand that. But I am wanting you to understand that. Give because you can. And you want to. And that's what this widow did. You compare that to the Pharisees, who took it upon themselves to tithe things like mint, dill, and cumin. But yet they neglect justice and mercy and faithfulness. So the point is when we give and what we have, even though it may be something extremely small, it can go a long way. Consider the mustard seed. How big is a mustard seed? I'm not real sure, but I know it's really, really small. It's the smallest of all seeds that are planted in the garden. But yet Jesus says in 13, it grows to be bigger than all the other plants. So big that the birds of the air can make a home in it. He also says this, that with just a little bit of faith, like a mustard seed, you can move mountains and you can uproot trees and tell them to go be planted in the sea. Matthew 17, verse 20 says, say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible to you. What about a fringe of a cloak? How much power and how much glory can it bring to God? If you turn to Luke 8, there's a story of a woman. Now what's interesting is in this specific story, you'd think that this wasn't supposed to happen. It was a story that was part of another one. We have a man that's begged Jesus to come to his house. And there's these crowds of people all around. And this woman that has an issue of blood for 12 years finds her way just close enough that she can touch the fringe of his garment. I imagine the woman at that moment, it says that she's immediately healed. She probably stopped. The crowd probably kept going. I can imagine her with maybe her head down. Maybe she even reached and fell down to her knees at the same time, just trying to reach Jesus. And she's on her knees, and she feels the power of Jesus come over and knowing that she's immediately healed. And all these emotions, I imagine there's probably a financial burden that's been had because she couldn't figure out or have this issue of blood healed. There's no telling what all that she's going through in that very moment. But because she found a way to get to Jesus and touch the hem of his garment, she's healed. Now what's interesting to me, or what's kind of funny to me, is Jesus said, who touched me? And Peter, being like myself, said, Jesus, there's people all around you. You're in a crowd of people. Of course somebody touched you. He said, no. I felt the power leave from me. When she realized she couldn't hide herself, she comes trembling to Jesus. And he says, go in peace. Your faith has saved you. So the hem of Jesus' garment was used to glorify, I guess, himself to God and his power. But just a simple piece of cloth or thread can glorify God. An alabaster jar. A jar of perfume. It's found in several different places. Matthew 26, Mark 14, even in John 12. An alabaster jar of perfume is worth about 11 months' worth of wages. But most likely, the alabaster jar was a gift given from some parents or family members. Might even be something that's passed down. Something very important to somebody. In John 12, it says that Mary was the one who used the alabaster jar. In Mark and Matthew, it just says a woman. I'm going to assume that it's the same woman. But what's interesting is when she breaks this jar of perfume and she is anointing Jesus, the disciples start scolding her. Why would she do this? We can use this money for something else. We can use this and sell it and get 300, I think it was 300 denarii is what it says. Yes? And be given to the poor. And Jesus said, you don't get it. You don't get it. You'll have the poor here, but I'm fixing to leave this world. This is for my burial. This is to prepare me for my burial. Sometimes we see things that may not be quite as important to us. Through our eyes, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Through our eyes, why would somebody do that? But what about that individual who gave the gift? Why did they feel like it's important? What did they give up to give that gift? And that can be time. It can be money. It could even be a card. Sometimes, just me personally, I can have a little anxiety when I try to call somebody. Wish them well. Hope them well. Let them know I'm praying for them. Sometimes that's not the easy thing to do. You never know what it might mean to somebody else. Matthew 18, Jason read about the little children. I was fortunate to listen to the man that runs Rainbow Omega. He came and spoke at a church that we were attending at the time, and he says, I envision Jesus taking someone with special needs, a little child, and sitting on his knee. Because they were bringing their children there for him to heal and to look after. And he says, that's what I envision. And that's changed the way that I looked at this verse. Not just a child, but a child with needs, whatever it may be, and sitting him on his knee. And he says, whoever then humbles himself as this child, he is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever sees one child such as this in my name receives me. See, the disciples were complaining about and wanting to know who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. But yet everything that they were doing, they were pushing these children away. This is in Matthew 18. In the next chapter, Jesus is trying to speak, and people are bringing these children to him for him to see, and the disciples are pushing them away again. He says, verse 13, and this is Matthew 19, 13, and 14, he said, Then some children were brought to him so that he may lay hands on them and pray. And the disciples rebuked them. But Jesus said, Let the little children alone, and do not hinder them from coming to me. For the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. And after laying hands on them, he departed from there. I was looking at children. If you search children, you're going to come to 1 John. And he uses the heading, "Oh, you little children, my children." But he's speaking to the church. It must have resonated with John. He says, we must be like children. How innocent they are. They want to do right, for the most part. They love to forgive, and they love. And their love is genuine. And what about our youth? Can't go without saying a little bit about the youth, right? Read 1 Timothy. Read 1 Timothy, read 2 Timothy. Paul encourages Timothy in 2 letters. Timothy was right alongside Paul in all of his journeys and his campaigns. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5 says, But the goal of our instruction is love from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. And later in chapter 4 and verse 11 and 12 it says, Prescribe and teach these things. Let no one look down on you for your youthfulness, but rather in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity, show yourself an example to those who believe. Now, he took it upon himself to write that, and it's in the Bible. We should allow our youth to do those things to help glorify God. In Luke 19, Jesus uses a donkey. Not only does he use a donkey, but he uses a colt that's never been ridden before. He sends his disciples into the town just before he goes into Jerusalem. So Jesus is making his final descent into Jerusalem before he'll eventually die. And he sends his apostles, he says, you'll go find a young colt, a donkey's colt, tied up. And he said, when you find it, take it and bring it back to me. So they go and they find just what he said. And they start untying the donkey. And the owner of the donkey says, why are you untying my donkey? He says, because the Lord has need of it. They take it and they put Jesus on top of it. They start spreading coats out. They have palm branches and all that kind of stuff. Luke 19 and verse 36, and it says, as he was going, they were spreading their coats on the road. And as he was approaching near the descent of the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of the disciples began to praise God joyfully with a loud voice for all the miracles which they had seen, shouting, blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. There's a lot of different things that we can look at that show how God is glorified in small things. You know, I don't know about you, but I don't know of many princes and kings and that sort of thing ride on top of a donkey's colt. It's very insignificant. I guess in today's time it would be like riding in a Ford Pinto instead of a limousine. But God chose that, something very small, very insignificant, to put Jesus on. We've been studying this book, More Than a Carpenter, with the youth. And in the book, they're trying to describe and explain the statistical probability, the validity, and the accuracy of Jesus and the prophecies that he fulfilled. They took the probability of Jesus only fulfilling, or one man fulfilling 8 of those prophecies. So one man fulfilling 8 prophecies. And that probability turned into 10 to the 17th power, which means that you take the number 10 and add 17 zeros. Okay? Coleman, I know that you know what that number is, but I'm not going to ask what that number is. But 10 to the 17th. Okay? That's enough to take, you can take that amount in silver dollars, spread those over the state of Texas, and they would be 2 feet deep. That's how many we're talking about. And the thought that someone, one individual, would fulfill that prophecy, only 8 of those prophecies, would be like taking a man, blindfolding him, picking up one of those coins, marking it, and then letting that man go out and find that coin that you marked, blindfolded. So 8 prophecies being fulfilled is 10 to the 17th power. And there's hundreds of them. Small things like riding a donkey's colt that God used to glorify God. Some things we see that sometimes can be insignificant, but they mean a lot. And the last thing I want to talk about is a lamb. A lamb. When a lamb slaughtered, it can be up to 140 pounds, but it can be much smaller than that. And when I say when a lamb slaughtered, I'm talking about for us to consume and for us to eat. But if you take a lamb, considering when you think about all the other animals, it's pretty insignificant. It's pretty small compared to a cow, a horse, or even an adult grown sheep. But God uses a lamb for us. You know, he used a lamb in the Passover. He even used a lamb when Isaac was going to be sacrificed. It was the first thing that was sacrificed. And it also says that we are his sheep. In Revelation 7 and verse 9, we start to read about the Lamb. And the Lamb being Jesus. I'm going to turn over there to... There's all these things that are going on, and we have all these people that have crossed over the Great Divide. We have the 12,000. We have all these tribes, and there's a great multitude. And that multitude, they were saying these things. He said, in verse 9 it says, and I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could count, from every nation and all tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes. And palm branches were in their hands. And they cry out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. And all the angels were standing there around the throne. The elders were there. But what I want to get to is verse 14. And I said to him, My Lord, you know... And he's wanting to know who all these people are. And he said to him, My Lord, you know. And one of the elders said to him, These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation and have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. For this reason they are before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will spread his tabernacle over him. They will hunger no longer, nor thirst any more. Nor will the sun beat down on them, nor any heat. For the Lamb in the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and will guide them to the springs of the water of life. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. God chooses a lamb. Something simple. Something easy. The lamb that we will be washed in their blood. One of these days we'll have that opportunity for a home in heaven with him because of those things. And when we think about this church and the things that we do, the talents that we have, please don't think that you have to stand up here in my shoes and speak. There's a lot of things that we do as a congregation, things that are done behind the scenes, food that is handed out, money that is given, calls that are made, cards that are written, that glorify the Lord's work. Don't take for granted those things that you do. They can make a big difference in someone's life. Somebody said one time, a long time ago, somewhere, don't sweat the small stuff. But then you go and look up books for how to de-stress your life. They talk about the simple things. So maybe it is about the small stuff. Maybe it is about making a phone call, telling somebody you love them, giving them a glass of water. There's a lot of different things that can glorify God, and I hope and I pray that us as a congregation that maybe you've gotten something out of this today. I know that there are those that might want to be washed in the Lamb's blood, to be washed away and be made white as snow. We've got this time, this opportunity to do that. Maybe there are those of you that the way the world is on your shoulders, and you want to get back to life as it should be. We can be more than happy to pray with you and hug you and all that kind of stuff. If you'd like to do that, you can do so as we stand and as we sing.
There's a fount that's free, 'tis for you and me. Let us haste